What did Delhi gain from this visit? Is this more about ensuring India's presence at SCO and paving the way for a smooth, tension-free Xi Jinping Narendra Modi meeting on the sidelines of the SCO at Tianjin, or is it more than that?
So there's no doubt that there has been some kind of a broader geopolitical reset between India and the great powers. This process really began when the Ukraine war broke out back 2-3 years ago.
De-escalation is a process which is significantly different than delimitation. Delimitation is a broad acceptance of some boundary lines. It is not delineation. Delineation means you take a map and you sit down, like
and you draw a new line.
Draw lines on maps.
The crucial factor for the Chinese is when Wang Yi received General Munir in Beijing a few weeks ago, their emphasis was more on counter-terrorism.
It's not that these foreign ministers of Afghanistan and Pakistan have not been meeting with Wang Yi earlier. They've been meeting regularly. There is no, that they were waiting for this particular visit that things would progress here.
The Russians, whether we like it or not publicly to admit, they played a stabilizing role in the India-China relationship.
Russia is being pushed towards the Chinese camp. The limitless partnership that has been agreed to between Russia and China in this regard.
Who would have thought an India-China reset prompted by a peaked Trumpian pivot that put India's delicate balancing act, that is its strategic multi-alignment between these three global hegemons, in jeopardy? It's now set off a dramatic course correct. Hello everyone, I'm Neena Gopal. Welcome to Global Express, our weekly look at events that impact India and its neighborhood. This week, we examine India's calculated and tactical realignment across continents as benefactor Russia moves to reclaim its dominance over Europe by dangling the Ukrainian peace carrot over Trump. It was followed this week by Delhi's remarkable milestone agreement on trade and the contentious border with Beijing. What consequences will it have for India's positioning in Asia, with a China that has close ties with Pakistan, a China that is building bridges with Afghanistan, a China that has Russia's blessings on warming China-India ties? Russia, China, clearly expanding their sphere of influence. Where does that leave India and its fraught ties with Washington? A Washington that prompted the Indian de-escalation with its giant neighbor, many say. Can India walk back from the Washington precipice, regain Trump's confidence, take the transactional path as others have done? In the face of Washington calling off trade talks, it is a watershed moment for India. The West's earlier assumption about India's role in balancing China is being looked at through a whole new prism in Delhi, in Beijing, in Moscow, in Washington. Does Delhi risk being marginalized on the world stage, or should that be less of a fear, less of a priority? Should our focus be on safeguarding Indian interests militarily, economically, and strategically? A paradigm shift. Talking us through this complicated shifting goalposts are three experts: Dr. Srikanth Kondapalli, Professor of China Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. He's the last word on China and a frequent and writer and communicator on China in both the national and international press. Welcome, Dr. Kondapalli.
Thank you.
Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma is a distinguished fellow at Vivekananda International Foundation and Center for Land Warfare Studies. He also holds the prestigious General Bipin Rawat Chair of Excellence at US of India. In 40 years of service, he's had multiple posts, including commanding the Ladakh Corps. Welcome, General. And last but not least, Zorawar Daulet Singh. He's an award-winning author, historian, and prominent commentator on strategic affairs and India's foreign policy. He's taken part in several track 2 dialogues associated with National Staff College, Wellington. He's adjunct fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies, part of the India International Center, previously associated with the Center for Policy Research. He has a PhD from King's College and an MA from Johns Hopkins. Welcome, Professor Singh.
Thank you.
My first question is to you, Dr. Kondapalli. Is it It's about Mr. Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister's visit to Delhi. If you could tell us, what did Delhi gain from this visit? Is this more about ensuring India's presence at SCO, at paving the way for a smooth, tension-free Xi Jinping Narendra Modi meeting on the sidelines of the SCO at Tianjin, or is it more than that? What is it? Because the actual nitty-gritty seems to be trade.
Thank you, Neena, for having me on the show, and greetings to the fellow
Honor.
panelists. Greetings to the fellow panelists as well. I think we are still not clear about the outcome of Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit because there is no joint press statement, and there were some handouts on the subjects to be covered or covered already in the two-day meetings with External Affairs Minister, Mr. Dr. Jaishankar, as well as Mr. Ajit Doval, the National Security Advisor, and the Prime Minister himself met with Foreign Minister Wang Yi. So in these meetings, we have had a few statements, but on your basic question on what is the outcome, it is still not clear because this is a work in progress. And for the past 9 months, there have been a flurry of activities. Last December, Mr. Ajit Doval went for the 23rd Special Representative meeting in Beijing. And then Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri visited. And then there was also the Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh's visit this June, and then the External Affairs Minister's visit in July last month. These were part of what the two leaders have decided at Kazan in the BRICS meeting on October 23rd last year on trying to resolve some of the contentious issues after the Galwan crisis in the June 2020. So at the moment, they are trying to set the house in order and bring about some kind of normalcy. Normalcy has not yet come about, even though NSA Ajit Doval mentioned that there is peace and tranquility. But as Dr. Jaishankar mentioned, there is no discussion on de-escalation. But quite interestingly, there was the mention about delimitation process being discussed on the border. So that is an indication of some progress. But I don't think the special representatives have had any major breakthrough in terms of the border-related issues, because the special representatives were tasked since 2005 to clarify the LAC, line of actual control.
That's right.
And then the actual definition, delimitation, demarcation, all these will happen later on.
Yes,
de-induction would be in terms of the troops that are being mobilized now. So that process will take time. But what has been discussed is in terms of what Dr. Jaishankar mentioned in his speech about the various issues like Manasarovar Yatra, the economic and trade issues, people-to-people contacts, basically on tourism visas, river data sharing, border trade, connectivity, and bilateral exchanges. So these are the issues that have been covered in the two-day visit by Mr. Wang Yi.
But is there a sweetener to all of this? I mean, has India been offered? India has cleared the visa applications for Chinese visitors, Dr. Singh. We have Professor Singh. And, India is also looking at imports of rare earth magnets. Is that right? I mean, they want to keep this critical, supply chain, mineral supply chain going. That's critical minerals such as lithium and cobalt and nickel and rare earths. So, so there is that, and there's also our pharmaceutical industries which need imports and, so semiconductors, batteries for our electric vehicles, because there was, a kind of a stop put by China on this kind of supplies. What do you have to say about that, Professor Singh? Do you think this is China dangling something which India needs and may not follow through on?
So I think before you get down to the sort of the micro pillars of the India-China relationship, there's no doubt that there has been some kind of a broader geopolitical reset between India and the great powers. This process really began when the Ukraine war broke out back 2-3 years ago. The idea that you could just leverage the United States had starting to become a little less likely when you the outbreak of the Ukraine conflict, which was the crisis between Western-Russian relations on European security, and it happened to also become a global confrontation because a lot of the repercussions on the economy, on trade, on energy security started to impact many of the other countries, particularly India and China. So I think India was realizing that it had to now build ties with the non-Western powers, particularly Russia and China, to sort of stabilize what will be a very different international environment. But I think that process of leading to, let's say, what we now see a reset or a kind of taken a period of 2, 3, 4 years, and now you see the sort of the turning point that comes in. Partly, as we know, it's obvious to everyone, the Washington's approach to pretty much everyone out there is putting an intense amount of pressure on every foreign policy.
But if we can then bring you in, General, could you give us your view on what the actual situation is on the ground? I mean, the Wang Yi visit was, sort of skirted around the border issues. So the Galwan crisis set off quite a crisis between India and China. Do you think that we can trust China going forward? Because, I mean, you have the Chinese building up permanent structures there. There are roads, there's underground shelters, there are tunnels, there's airstrips. And could you tell us whether this is something that, you've also said to me, separately that the time that it would take for Chinese troops to be deployed on the border is much shorter than it would be for India. So how should India tackle this sort of long drawn out, military de-escalation, which hasn't actually happened, so to really speaking, has it?
Thank you, Neena, for inviting me, and hello to the fellow panelists. It's a very complicated world and very complex issues here involved. If you ask me, I agree with what Professor Kondapalli says, as always. The fact of the matter is there a change in this visit of last couple of days? I mean, something that you feel the pulse of change, even when the facts are not clear. I would say yes, there is a change. There is a significant advancement of what has been happening over a period of 5 years. And despite all these meetings, and I do not want to ascribe everything to President Trump and what he's doing and what he's not doing. But the fact is that in the course of quite some time, there have been intensive meetings and intensive discussions taking place at various fora. And this visit is a little change. I mean, we may be rushing the thing and saying so, but then there is a change, and there is a change that needs to be studied in that manner. One issue. Now, whether President Trump's actions brought about this or not is a separate issue. But indeed, Chinese economic coercion against India would have been a catalyst, because Chinese have been coercing us over a period of time, especially on critical areas like the batteries or the rare earths, magnets, tunnel boring machines, urea. There are many issues on which Chinese have been coerced. Chinese are masters in economic coercion. I mean, they have learned and honed the art to a next level, not against us, but we have followed what they've been doing to many other countries. So, there was economic coercion, and it would have hindered our progress on many issues. So that may have been a catalyst of coming across. Now, where do I find a change? Professor Kondapalli has rightly pointed out most issues. I see that there is this early harvest back after 8 years, 7, 8 years. I thought the early harvest we heard when Sushma Swaraj was the foreign minister. And there were many of the Chinese who spoke about early harvest, and early harvest was related to only one border those years. I'm not talking about today because it's not explicit, but it was relating to Sikkim. And in the early harvest, first time it started, it was pre-Doklam also. The 72 days standoff in Doklam. So, Doklam actually brought out great amount of differences of opinions on Batangla, Gamochin, all the other areas. So now there are significant objections to early harvest, as also significant objections over a very long period of time of dividing the borders on sectoral basis. We wanted one package, the whole border to be discussed, while the Chinese have been saying, okay, let's delineate what we can do and then move forward on this one. So I think by saying early harvest and signing it as part of the 10-point consensus, which was signed by the NSA and by the as an SR, and by Mr. Wang Yi as an SR, there is a semblance of a change happening. Now, whether the early harvest relates to the central sector or relates to Sikkim, because Sikkim border was decided in 1890. It's very old British Chinese border decision. Are we now also talking about the central sector? That makes a major change. Second issue I find the change is that now they have made co-commanders at lieutenant general level or general level people responsible for the central sector as also the eastern sector. Now, presently in the course of last 5 years, only the generals in generals, and then of course the joint secretary in the ministry attended only the western sector in Chushul and Moldo. But now they have opened up discussions separately for the eastern sector at general level and separately for the central sector, which means including Sikkim. Now that makes a tremendous amount of change. So there is a semblance of change which is apparent in these meetings, and both these 10 points or 10 points consensus and 10 points roadmap, which are separate 10 points brought about by the Minister of External Affairs as also by the SR, are significant in that manner. I mean, I won't say so. So let me put it this way, that there is a difference. Now I'll end by saying, look, delimitation, there is de-escalation, all the Ds that you're referring to, disengagement, delimitation, delineation, de-escalation, de-induction, all these Ds. The word used is delimitation in writing. Though many places, other words like de-escalation has come up. De-escalation is a process which is significantly different than delimitation. Delimitation is a broad acceptance of some boundary lines. It is not delineation. Delineation means you take a map and you sit down, like
and you draw a new line.
Draw lines on maps, like what happened between General Hamid and General Bhagat on the line of control. They sat over for 6 months in 1972 and delineated the line of control, in which they signed 19 maps, 29 mosaics, and both side signatures maps are available around that. So that was delineation. Now, delineation is something a much step ahead of the delimitation process.
And the de-induction. But we'll come back to that on that, General. I just want to go back to Zorawar. Zorawar, if you can just tell us, we just pick up where you left off and give us the big broad picture of these shifting goalposts in the world at the moment.
Yeah, so after the Ladakh crisis of 2020, in fact, at the end of that year, both sides had come to an understanding that they will not fight a war. So things had calmed down within a few months of that bloody clash. But what happened was, naturally, from the Indian side and from the Chinese side, they both had, because it was such a major sort of breakdown of the relationship, both brought new terms into the pictures. That process of normalization had dragged on and on and on. And as was alluded to last year, finally in Kazan, both leaderships come to, at least at a big level, to say that now we have set the stage for that process to begin. It took a little further. My own understanding or interpretation would be that I think the Indian side was watching to see what was happening in the West. We keep telling ourselves that we are not looking at what's happening with Indo-US relations, Indo-Western relations, but the fact is we are. Now, we shouldn't be. I think the relationship with China should be built and stabilized and developed on its own terms. But the fact is that you have pitched the US factor into your entire grand strategy for the last 20 years, whether we like it or not. So I think you were kind of waiting to see what this new regime in Washington will look like, even though the writing was on the wall that the Trump regime and the overall reorientation of American policy is now to look at all major parts of the world in a very different terms than what's the new conservatives or the globalists used to look at. They were trying to sort of expand their influence and project power everywhere. So if they are going to look at China on its own terms, I think India saw that Trump is going to deal with Xi Jinping. He's going to stabilize ties. So I think the writing on the wall was, if you don't quickly find and regroup, you will be left out in the cold. And that's precisely what happened. The Pakistan crisis suddenly showed you that you were completely sort of on the margins. So I think there's been a little bit of scrambling around, scurrying around of the thinking heads inside the establishment, because let's face it, we have been caught off guard from a geopolitical standpoint. And now you're seeing in the last several weeks this quick course correction, because a lot of it is symbolism. The statement that was issued yesterday, day before, from the foreign ministries and even the Chinese side, they are giving a very positive picture to the process of stabilization. I'm not saying it's happened, but there's no doubt that the Indian establishment has taken a call that now we are moving on to a reset. Now, bargaining those resets is a matter of weeks and months. I think the Modi-Xi Jinping meeting in a few weeks will reveal and take it to that next step. But as far as the frontier is concerned, I think as General Sharma said and Professor Kondapalli, the idea of a stable and peaceful frontier, I think, is now being accepted by both sides. And I don't foresee them challenging at a tactical level and playing those kind of low-level games. I think now there's a bigger play at hand. For Delhi, the bigger play is that you are now going to have to re-establish a new equilibrium with the United States. And for that, you need strategic depth on the Eurasian front, which means very robust ties with Russia and stable ties with China. So there's no doubt about that. And I think that's where we are today.
That's very well put. Dr. Kondapalli, if I can bring you back in, there is also the other aspect. I mean, Wang Yi went from Delhi to Kabul. And he had this meeting with the Afghan Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi and Pakistan's Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar. It's supposed to be their sixth trilateral. What was that about? Is that aimed at keeping the US, which is wooed the Pakistan Army chief, with all these lovely, promises, basically with Pakistan offering them again, rare earths in Balochistan, even oil, untapped oil reserves in the Arabian Sea. So is this China's game to keep the US out, or, and breathing new life into this China-Pakistan economic corridor, extending into Afghanistan seems, almost surreal, because right now the Chinese are unable to operate in Balochistan. I mean, I've heard from, within Balochistan about how they're limited to Gwadar, the port itself, and they're not allowed to even step out into Balochistan. So what do you have to say about this?
Well, I think a few factors are weighing in the Chinese mind in this regard on China, Afghanistan, Pakistan front. One is, of course, General Munir's lunch meeting with President Trump and the reports about the oil factor in Pakistan. Secondly, the rare earth metals in Balochistan. Thirdly, in terms of the Trump's family shares in relation to the cryptocurrency, these we have heard about. But the crucial factor for the Chinese is when Wang Yi received General Munir in Beijing a few weeks ago, their emphasis was more on counterterrorism.
When Wang Yi received Asim Munir in Beijing?
In Beijing, there was the emphasis on counterterrorism rather than on anything else. So their main worry was about the CPEC security, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor security. And so this is weighing heavily on the Chinese mind, number one. Number two, of course, the Chinese have the trilateral with Afghanistan and Pakistan in relation to the SEO discussions on Afghanistan. There is a block within the SEO related to Afghan factor because Afghanistan is also part of the SEO observer position. And so there is a chapter related to Afghanistan within the SEO. So probably China wants to elicit the opinions of the Afghans and Pakistan in this regard. Thirdly, of course, the Chinese are themselves concerned about the Uyghur factor. And the Western Theater Command commander has proposed a few buffer zones in Badakhshan in Afghanistan so that there is no infiltration by the Uyghurs into Xinjiang, trained by the Al-Qaeda. The Khorasan province ISIS chapter has some links to the Uyghurs. And so this is a big concern. As you know that the Uyghurs were present in northeast Syria, and there is a change in the Syrian government position recently. Right. The head of this is closer to the Uyghurs because they have actually worked with them previously. And hence, this is a Chinese concern related to the Uyghur factor in Fatah region as well as in the Khorasan province. So that is so they want to keep basically away the Uyghur factor in relation to Afghanistan and Pakistan. And the Chinese are going to the extent of even training the Afghan armed forces in relation to counter-terrorism in Badakhshan. So that is the third factor weighing in the Chinese mind.
That's very interesting. General, if I can come back to you on what you were telling us about the border. Now, I just want to go back to the fact that the Chinese are, entrenched quite strongly on the line of actual control. And, are we going to see, can we trust the Chinese, to moving forward to keep the border, sort of on the down low and play up the economic, connections between the two countries?
Okay, Neena, let me also take a step away from, overrating the visit of Foreign Minister Wang Yi to Kabul. You see, just exactly 2 months ago, there was this China-South Asia Cooperation Forum that met in Kunming. That's on 19th and 20th of June, where there were 10 countries represented. All South Asian countries were represented. There was a Kunming initiative, a Kunming action plan, which was issued on that day, and which included a large number of developmental works in all these countries. And so therefore, it's not that these foreign ministers of Afghanistan and Pakistan have not been meeting with Wang Yi earlier. They've been meeting regularly. There is no, that they were waiting for this particular visit that things would progress here. There is a talk of CPEC 2.0, and one has to see as to what is the success ratios of CPEC 1.0 to talk about CPEC 2.0 that includes Afghanistan. So that's the issues about Afghanistan, and it's important for us to say that, it's not this visit alone. It's regular meetings that take place between all of them. To answer your question specifically about the border, now the fact is that we are absolutely clear that you cannot delink or even move away from the economic and trade issues with China. They are established and they are bound to rise. It is important for India, especially because of the the raw material, for the subcomponents, and many sub-assemblies that we buy from China, which are essential for our Indian growth, and therefore delinking it from Chinese or from any one of these other South Asian countries from where we do trade, which also have linkages with the broader Chinese industry. So then, economics is one basket. Now, if economics is one basket, the border is a separate thing altogether. There is
Because you have these, if I can just interrupt for a minute, you have these no patrol buffer zones, right? I mean, are these no patrols buffer zones still in place, or will that change at all?
So the fact is that to develop trust on the border is far away, very far away. You just cannot start in this manner, because not only that the infrastructure has been developed in that manner, there is also a substantial quantum of force that was brought in from Xinjiang, which is already located here, with infrastructure developed, habitat built, defense works increased, and with all that in existence, there is no question of any taking a step away. Now, so the fact is that these two issues stand de-linked. The economic cooperation goes in a different basket, and the border comes into a different basket, and we have to accept it in that manner, and not even talk of establishing trust in this immediate future. Because even if it is de-escalated, which is a next step, not now, another step.
Right.
Even if it de-escalated 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers, it is just too proximate to us, to our borders, to relent on our kind of stature we had. So when our occupation of the entire watershed, and watershed, I would also include the watershed in the in the Excitation area, as also the watershed across into the eastern side, holding it is extensively important to us because of the threat of the Chinese infringing it. So the buffer zones which were created post 2020 in these 5-6 places in eastern Ladakh are there to stay, and there is no talk further on any kind of dilution of the buffer zones as they exist on the eastern side. So the border is border, and border has to be held in that manner.
Yeah, that's very interesting. In fact, Professor Singh, if I can bring you back in, could you give us an idea of what we can expect now with Russia as well? I mean, today our External Affairs Minister Jaishankar has just met Sergei Lavrov, and what is the Russia-India dynamic going to be in the face of the deterioration, really, shall we say, on our relations with Washington? I mean, what can India, will India be looking forward to, the SCO summit to link up with Prime Minister Modi, with Vladimir Putin and also Xi Jinping?
Yeah, so the Russia relationship is obviously very, very vital for India's foreign policy. We know, of course, now with the pressure that you're going to face even on access high-tech military systems. I mean, I can't see any serious policymaker in India relying on Western US hardware for critical offensive strike systems. Not that we have in the past. We've always sort of been building up the US portfolio in a very calibrated, careful way. It was always about supporting infrastructure. But now that there's definitely going to be the indigenization and a lot of collaboration with Russian high tech after the Ukraine war. I think they themselves are in a commanding position to really scale it up if you want to go in that direction. But of course, the rest of it is all the BRICS, all the non-Western ideas and opportunities that you yourself, for your interests, do require. And if you want to even talk of, for example, the next phase of globalization and insulate yourself from the old Bretton Woods frameworks, you have to have a strong tie-up with Moscow. And also, I think behind the scenes, the Russians, whether we like it or not publicly to admit, they played a stabilizing role in the India-China relationship. There's no doubt that there are limits to what it can do. And I think they, for their own interests, not because they're doing something altruistic, it's in their interest to have a stable India-China relationship. And I think there are occasions in the back channel where India, like for example, even the stabilizing that happened in the fall of 2020 after the Ladakh, that 5-point agreement was actually signed in Moscow. It was the Indian
Yes.
foreign minister who was there, and so there is a. Let's not always reduce this to this derogatory that it's all about oil or all about
Yeah, it isn't.
legacy equipment. It's far more comprehensive. I mean, if you have the president of the Russian Federation being reached out by the president of the United States, practically desperate for a Ukraine deal and to stabilize Europe, I mean, it tells you what the world looks like today, right? So
That's
I
true.
think I think so. The Indian side is
He's no
recognized.
longer a global pariah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Indian side is recognized that the economy bit, whether you talk of all these supply chains, at some level, the Chinese and the Russians are developing high tech. They have their energy networks. You've got to plug into this greater Eurasian geoeconomic space. We've always
That's
been
very
this sort of
interesting.
West leaning economy in Asia. That's okay.
Hmm.
But if globalization itself is recentering towards the Pacific and Eurasia, you have no choice but to do that. So, and the US factor will always be there, right? They invested heavily in Southeast Asia. They're there in Japan. They're there in Australia. But you've got to have a broader picture. And I think the Indian policymakers have finally kind of responding to a new reality. I think that's where I see it. So the India-Russia ties should be looked at from that point of view. So I think the Americans, when they're saying that, oh, we can just displace them here and diversify, maybe sell Indians a little more LNG. I think the calculus in India is much bigger than that.
Very well put. Beautifully said. Can we come back to you, Dr. Kondapalli? I was just also interested in the fact that Trump himself is also aiming to mend fences with China because he hasn't actually, given this tariff beating that he has given India to the Chinese, and he wants to apparently make a major visit, state visit to Beijing in late October. What do you see? Is that, I mean, I understand that for the US, the Ukraine Europe challenge is huge, but I think they also see a method of possibly, removing Russia and China or driving a small wedge between Russia and China and stepping into that space. Or am I getting it completely wrong?
Yes, that factor still is there to drive a wedge between Russia and China. This has been one of the views within the neocons previously, and the suggestion that by taking a lot of action on Russia since 1991, basically Russia is being pushed towards the Chinese camp. The limitless partnership that has been agreed to between Russia and China in this regard. So in terms of US-China, there is this Geneva, London, Stockholm meetings between the two trade representatives. And finally, what they have is a 90-day leash time was given for the tariffs. But essentially, 30% of tariffs still exist on China. And there is a substantial decrease in the Chinese exports to the United States. While we have seen China diversifying trade towards the ASEAN countries, which have become the major trading partners, there is also the Japan, Korea, and even India, $130 billion trade. Australia, after the Prime Minister's visit to Beijing, there was the understanding with Australia in terms of the expansion of trade. So the Chinese were able to kind of wriggle out of these tariffs by advanced preparation regarding the diversification of trade. So this is still a factor in the China-US relations. That is an X factor for the Americans because of the, as you mentioned, the magnets as well as rare earth metals on which the United States is heavily dependent on the Chinese for their own defense, electronics, manufacturing, and a host of other subjects. So this is the Chinese, pressure that really worked in terms of the tariff-related issues. So what kind of reset that Trump would make is not clear at this moment. Some did speculate that the meeting in Alaska is to divide Russia and China.
That's right. It was a very interesting idea.
Yes. However, they have a limitless partnership, which has been reflected in the number of visits. The trade between Russia and China has increased to over $240 billion, quite high from a low level of $60-70 billion to that of nearly more than $200 billion. And the energy supplies to China increased substantially. Nearly 47% of these are now going to China. And also in the financial markets in Russia, China is dominating the financial sector, given the SWIFT system and the cross-border related transactions. Now that the Chinese are emphasizing on this cross-border, transactions. So there is also the economic factor which is weighing in the Russia-China relations. In addition to the weapon systems, there is also the Chinese EV sector, electric vehicle sector, exporting a lot of these EVs to Russia. So there is the manufacturing, which is also seen in terms of the Russia-China relations. So we do not know whether Trump is driving this wedge between Russia and China, or he's actually bringing these together.
Yeah, but that's the other interesting concept which was raised in something I read today about how the US could also be trying to push India out of the the comfortable embrace that it has as Russia, which is basically also another concept. But I want to look at Quad also. I mean, Trump is set to arrive in Delhi for the Quad summit later this year, and but there is a very strong feeling right now that is being talked about that that India no longer matters in that Quad relationship, because it's not militarily or even where Navy wise, I mean, the Indian Navy is concerned, has it really put itself out against China? General, do you have something to say on that?
Okay, Neena, one of the points that I wish to mention is that the Chinese retain strong leverages against United States, whether it's a form of rare earths and metals, or it is the kind of Chinese investment into the US bond markets. And if the Chinese, as it is, they've withdrawn about $400 billion over a period of time from the US bond markets. If the Chinese reduce their holdings in bond markets, about 800 odd billion dollars that they have here, the American economy will see a major hiccup. So the relationship is now rests mutually between nations, and it is all based on national interest, and that's a major important issue. I will hasten to say that if we read into what President Trump has been talking about international organizations.
He's made cracks against BRICS and other organizations.
He wanted cracks against BRICS. He doesn't speak well of NATO, United Nations. He brushes aside, to say, and in one of these discussions that one saw on the TV, when somebody referred to AUKUS, he says, "What is AUKUS?" So then somebody explained, and twice it was explained to him, AUKUS means this, this, and this. So he didn't even recognize the word AUKUS. So while we may be banking on the word Quad, it is self-help world. It is, nobody gives us any technology. Even the United States has not given us technology. Basically, if we are talking about critical technologies which are imperative for us to move forward, some things which we are lacking, well, we have to depend on Russia. We have to depend on Israel partly, maybe France somewhat. But the fact is that largely it has to be done internally, which is the thrust of what Prime Minister also spoke on the ramparts of Red Fort. So I would say that it's good to talk in Quad, But nothing tangible seems to have come out of Quad. If we say that we wanted subsurface knowledge or subsurface, some kind of infrastructure to tell us as to what is happening in the high seas, well, nothing has been forthcoming for quite some time. So I think finally, whether President Trump comes to Quad or not, or the Vice President JD Vance comes or somebody else comes, I think that's one has to see it in future. But the fact is that we have to rely on ourselves and not rely into any one of these organizations per se.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Professor Singh, if I can come back to you, could you give us a look at the diminishing role of, NATO in Europe? I mean, how will that impact the greater, sort of Eurasia and Europe and all of that? Because, I mean, there is a view that, that Trump reducing troops in NATO is basically because he doesn't want to upset Russia, and he wants Russia to grow and be a counter to China. I don't know how far this is true, but the other view is that I mean, he wants Russia to grow, but is the world open to that kind of thing? Not the world so much. Is Europe going to be allowing something like that?
So NATO was developed, as we all know, to counter the Soviet and the Warsaw
Soviet
Pact
Union.
like 70 years ago.
Yeah.
After 91, you have the Soviet Union disappear. And then you have this creeping expansion by NATO, even though they made these very explicit assurances to the other side that they will not go beyond Germany to the east. And what we instead saw was 20, 25 years of literally they gobbled up most of Central Europe, Eastern Europe, and it kind of reaches this collision point in Ukraine. Ukraine kind of became the red line for the Russians. And since 2014, when it was a US, NATO, EU project really to topple the legitimate government in Ukraine and then put in a puppet regime in 2014. So that's really when the crisis of, has NATO gone a bridge too far? It's taken on such a big venture. The Russians, what their response was, they first established control over Crimea. They started intervening in the eastern portions of Ukraine, which are where millions of Russians inhabit. So they kind of took this incremental approach. They reached some kind of a standstill agreement, the Minsk agreements. But instead, I think what the West saw was what was, from the Russian point of view, a reasonable attempt to try and find stability, even with NATO practically on its doorstep. I think the West said, no, they will not have a veto on NATO's endless expansion, because their vision is to eventually go all the way and gobble up parts of the Middle East, come down to the Indian Ocean. I mean, it's a juggernaut, right? So the juggernaut stops when somebody resists with firm force. And I think that's where the Russians intervened. It was a big decision, hundreds of thousands of Russian casualties. Of course, we're talking of at least a couple of million Ukrainians. So the losses are World War I, World War II levels, particularly for the Ukrainian side. The Russians have finally put an end to this NATO project. And now where the new line will be drawn, I think that's where this bargaining is happening between, but I don't see the US withdrawing from Europe. They are really cutting their losses, at the same time trying to hold on to much of Ukraine and keep an eye on the future. Because don't forget it, the alternative to the MAGA or the Trump are the real authors of this NATO expansion, the new conservatives, the unipolar sort of, who kind of have this vision of total primacy. So it's like from the frying pan to the fire. You have the frying pan today. So that's why the Russians are dealing with this, because they know that the alternative is those guys are completely ideologically, viscerally hatred of the Russian race. So they're saying that let's see, coming back to even a point like Quad and others, all these arrangements were really developed when the Eurasian great powers were lying quiet, that they were not going to push back. But if you see the Russians and the Chinese now, and they're developing fairly close military links, particularly not aimed at anybody, but the US in the Pacific, eventually Quad is going to brush up against this countervailing force from Eurasia, which is resisting the US and its alliances. So India is going to find itself in this very difficult point and it's getting nothing in return, right? Our security problems are on our immediate land frontiers. You've got this massive monster on the west, a nuclear armed state that continues to sort of, and then you have, of course, the Chinese frontier. Quad has had nothing to say on these core security problems. Their agenda is maritime security, Taiwan, South China Sea, East China Sea. That's 2,500 miles away from India. So there is no commonality in a geopolitical sense. And I think what Indian side is doing is you've invested so much ideologically, politically, you can't sort of now backtrack. And it's going to send a bad signal to everybody. So this will be like a talk shop. There is going to be no concrete security architecture through the Quad. India, in fact, should hold out for a multipolar architecture in Asia, which will require it to be inclusive, which will have to have Beijing, Moscow, Japan, Delhi, Washington, all the big players, even ASEAN on the table. Now, today, there is no stomach for that in the West, but that is something where is going to happen in the next 5 years, 10 years, once some of these flashpoints are kind of subdued.
That's very well put. Dr. Kondapalli, if I could come back to you and, concluding statements, I know you have to rush somewhere, but, a lot of people believe that it would be impolitic on India's part to not rebuild ties with the US. I mean, what can we do? I mean, if we may be irrelevant in Quad, as Zorawar says, but we were an economic partner, a strategic partner. I mean, it didn't go to the full extent. Do you think that it's now, a stage has come where India needs to rethink its ties with Washington? And what would you suggest they do?
I think there is a back channel discussion that is still happening even now between the United States and India. We remember we have the foundational agreements, Becca, Sismova, Lemova, and all that. And there is also the Malabar exercises. And then, as you mentioned before, there is the Quad meeting, summit level meeting due. One doesn't know whether President Trump will come to India. This is not a good time in the sense of the feelings are slightly negative, and hence
that's right.
Probably. And then the August 25th trade delegation also has been postponed in their visit to India from the United States. So this is not an opportune moment right now, but I think there is a back channel discussion that is already happening in terms of the India-US relations resetting. But that, of course, depends on President Trump and his team, which is imposing 50% tariffs on India. There is no relenting on that. We will see on August 27th, these tariffs would be in place. Before that, if there is any change of mind, we probably will be going back again into the diplomatic reset with the United States. That's quite possible. There is also the signaling in relation to the LCA engines and on other weapon systems from the United States to China. So we have to see how this back channel diplomacy will succeed in terms of the US-India relations.
That's very interesting you say that, General, but also the other point is that both America and China are wooing Pakistan relentlessly. So we have, if we do reach out to, as everyone is advising us to reach out to all the major powers, I mean, if we should build up, strengthen our relation with China and the US and so on and so forth, how does it really, how do we factor in the Pakistan, factor?
Okay, let me take a step back on India-US. And my feel is that with the way one reads into what's happening into the United States, finally, after some kind of work has been done at the base levels, foundational levels, it will be the principals that who have to meet and talk and come across to a rapprochement. Because the decision making is now all nearly been centered around President Trump. And if that is so, finally, inevitably, it has to be a meeting between the principals which will decide the course of our relationship forward at a level below it. Now, if you read into what the article written in Financial Times of Pete Navarro or the statement made by the US Treasury Secretary, these are quite negative articles against India. So, everybody speaks the same tone and language that emanates from the top. Finally, it has to be at that level after some kind of work has been done. But having said so, look, Pakistan has got its own importance and let's not decry it. It is true, it's geostrategically important. It's a gateway to Central Asia, to Afghanistan, to Iran. It is also to Central Asia. So the geostrategic location of Pakistan is there to stay and it is not going anywhere in any times to come. So let's not underplay the importance of Pakistan for United States. Their relationship is since independence, and of course there has been little seesaw and ups and downs, but it still stood through thick and thin. So Pakistan's relationship with United States is separate, and Pakistan's relationship with China is, of course, higher than skies and lower than the oceans and whatever they say, all the cliches that they talk about. India has its own standing. I sometimes get perturbed to say that everything about India is dealing linked across to Pakistan, and I don't know why. We are a nation which is about 6 times Pakistan's economy. We have a defense budget about 6 times of Pakistan. We have a standing in the world, a global standing in in larger number of ways. And there is no matrix in which Pakistan can be hyphenated with India. So, U.S. relationship with Pakistan, United States might talk India Pakistan as one word, as if it's one word, but India is not in no way linked across to Pakistan. We have our own way of dealing. We have a much larger, over $100 billion trade with United States, and so with China, with large number of countries. Pakistan is nothing in that comparison. So I would say that Pakistan's relationship with United States, Pakistan's relationship with China are their relationship, and they would continue as it is. We can't hinder it. We can't stop it. It's a separate thing. But we have our own standing, and we should work on our own standing to discuss across with the global South, with as Professor Zorawar says, with the as the multipolar world, as a pole of the multipolar world, and also with the European Union, with African Union, or with Russia. So we are a different thing altogether. So I think let's leave Pakistan to stew wherever Pakistan wants to stew. If he wants to raise the fire, okay, we'll handle it at that time.
Is India reinventing itself in the sense that, we have a strong support from Russia, we have a questionable relationship with China, and definitely a relationship that has gone to the dogs with the USA. So what is India's path looking forward?
So, this period of the post-Cold War phase where India kind of felt it has this gentle sort of phase where it could sort of build itself up, have stable ties with the West, not worry too much about geopolitics, and the economy will just keep growing sort of organically through globalization. I think that whole window is completely changed, and you've got to now have these multiple facets that are happening at the same time. We've had this debate that focus on the economy and let geopolitics not matter,
Yes.
or vice versa. I think today we don't have the luxury of, let's say, how China rose in the 80s and 90s under what was fairly a US-led dominant durable order. You are trying to rise in a multipolar order. So for that, you've got to reinvent and transform your foreign policy to some of the old ideas that you had kind of sort of, were wishing away, and that these were sort of the hesitations of history and this were discarded. But at the same time, you've got to also build up your domestic capacities. I think at times we have kind of felt that it won't come to us. Problems are not going to come to us. But the China crisis, the Ukraine crisis has shown that you cannot be immune to the breakdown of the unipolar world and the emergence of the multipolar world. So I think you've got to co-author these new multilateral institutions. You've got to shape this setting, and at the same time respond to the negative spillovers that are happening on your frontiers. And so I think it's about changing your entire geopolitical compass and the frameworks that you had taken for granted. So it is coming as a shock, because if you look at the entire Indian strategic community and the policy making elite, they are still kind of, in a daze. And now it's time to sort of, you can't go back to the old ways. You've got to now reinvent yourself. And if you do not, you're going to be on the losing end. And some of those ideas are already in place, but they are not being taken up at the highest level by the political establishment, by the bipartisan kind of consensus. Once they do, you will see India in a very, very different phase, because then it can handle these mini tactical crises. Right now, at the strategic level, we are still waiting to see how things will unfold. You don't need to wait. You know what's happening now. Accept the new reality and then and adapt.
Yeah. In conclusion, it must be said, of course, that whether Trump set off the India-China détente or not, it's all too evident that the Chinese Foreign Minister's visit did come on the heels of Trump's tariff announcements, even if he ostensibly only came out to iron out the details of the SCO summit and Prime Minister Modi's visit, his first visit to China in 7 years, it must be said. So the India-China pragmatic realignment could be the first steps towards building an India-Russia-China axis, as a counter to US hegemony. India is clearly shifting goalposts very quickly. So thank you, Dr. Srikanth Kondapalli, for your insights. Thank you, Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma. And thank you, Professor Zorawar Daulet Singh, for coming on the show. Thank you, viewers. Do click on the New Indian Express and the Global Express icon and watch and share.